To one of our top stories this morning, Air Canada has bowed to the uproar over bonuses. The airline says its CEO and executive vice presidents are giving up the payouts that were disclosed in a filing last week and sparked a public relations nightmare for a company that secured, of course, a multi-billion-dollar federal backstop due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Richard Leblanc is a professor of governance law and ethics at York University, and he joins us now to discuss the latest details with Air Canada. Richard, thanks very much for being with us. What was your reaction to the Air Canada response?
Well, it shouldn't have happened. I mean, in a situation like this, you ask where was the board, but you also ask, in this case, where was the government? And it's governance 101 that we should have learned from 2008 that executive pay, if you receive government aid, executive pay does not go up. Dividends are not declared, and buybacks do not occur. There's no excuse. You ask where was the board and where was the government? So, these continuous apologies, there's a pattern here of the government dropping the ball.
If it shouldn't have happened, just to get you to elaborate a little bit, why do you think it did happen?
Well, the arguments are made that, it's a pandemic, we're working hard, you don't want to lose good people. 4 of the 6 members of the Compensation Committee of Air Canada are current or former CEOs. They tend to be sympathetic to executive pay. There's a 5th member who is a partner at a law firm. There's a 6th member who is a former provincial premier. Mr. Dewar. And, at some point, the hands should have gone up and said, we're laying off thousands of people. We're not refunding customer money. As a matter of optics, this should not happen. So you shake your head. I really think, John and Amber, that we need a Pay Czar in Canada, similar to what Ken Feinberg had was in 2008, because we have patterns here of dozens and dozens of companies that are declaring dividends, increasing executive pay. And what that means is that taxpayers are funding this.
Well, I think what you highlight, too, is it comes down to corporate culture, an ethos that permeates, the executive ranks as well as the board level. And I contrast what Air Canada did with Lululemon last year, which decided to continue to pay workers that weren't employed, cut executive compensation, forego compensation for board members, and then put that money towards a fund that helps its own employees. And you think about Lululemon trying to cultivate a brand of warm and fuzzies with its consumer. A lot of air passengers don't get that in the best of times when they're traveling with airlines.
Yeah, and this was a missed opportunity if Air Canada did something similar, Amber. I mean, we see that the CEO's pay package was given to the Air Canada Foundation, which supports charitable causes. There was an opportunity here to do the right thing and to lead by example. And unfortunately, the Lululemon examples are few and far between. The evidence is that the vast majority of companies that are receiving aid, including wage subsidies, have not done that. And that is the government, because the government sets the conditions. So the government should have been very clear. And I even think that the government, given the size of the aid package for Air Canada, should have a representative on the board of directors of Air Canada to see what those conversations are like and to raise their hand. We did that, for example, with General Motors.
Well, let me push back and play devil's advocate on that, because a lot of companies will recoil at that thought and point to the fact that this decision has been reversed, that this is a mistake that has now self-corrected, that it came to light, and so you don't need something like a Pay Czar, to use your words.
Well, when you look at the evidence of the number of companies that are enriching shareholders and executives with taxpayer money, you see a pattern. And it's not a mistake. You don't make a mistake with executive pay. The intention is there, and they should have stress tested if the stock went up what the total payout could be. So it's not a mistake. It was intentional, and it was well into the pandemic. These decisions were made well into 2020. So the transportation minister, it was foreseeable that some form of bailout was to occur. The transportation minister should have said very early on, if as a condition of the bailout, we cannot have money going to executive pay, and we have to have customers being refunded. Now, customers are being refunded slowly. It's been a bit of a battle, but what we don't want is backtrenching. We want terms and conditions as a condition of receiving the aid. And we haven't even seen the transparency of the aid package. That should be fully transparent. The minutes of the meetings between Air Canada executives and the federal government should also be disclosed. So we see opaqueness, and this is a significant amount of money, $6 billion.
I want to come back specifically to that concept of board supervision, which you referenced. When I look at the members of the board who are charged with executive compensation, we are talking about some very established people with very big reputations in the corporate world. What does it say to you that you're saying there should have been more board oversight when some of the people who were in the decision-making process for what should be paid, given the circumstances around us, are such high-profile individuals?
Well, they are, and there is a significant amount of airline experience, including a former CEO of Air New Zealand. John, you're right. And then you scratch your head and you say, are they truly independent? And we know, for example, a few are over tenured. We know that there's one example of a person on the pay committee whose firm has done business with Air Canada. So there's ways of becoming sympathetic to the arguments that management make for executive pay. And therefore, if you're judging just on output, you say to yourself, maybe some sort of supervisory role of an independent czar or some other entity is appropriate. And I think, given the evidence so far of the number of companies, and this is, there's over 60 companies that have received government aid and have enriched shareholders. Maybe some sort of pay czar is appropriate.
I do. Let's talk about that just for a second, because you've brought it up a couple of times in this conversation. And while there are some very clear-cut examples of aid received during the pandemic, we know that there are more nuanced examples as well. Companies that were tapping into an assortment of emergency programs that the government put out there. And it seems pretty difficult to sort of pinpoint where money came in, and then when companies make decisions that are, say, for shareholder-friendly things, whether it's buying back stock or dividends. But I get what you're saying. How would you go about implementing that concept of a pay czar, knowing full well that each company in corporate Canada is probably going to point the finger at somebody else when someone is sort of questioning, whether or not they were doing things ethically?
Well, a pay czar would have the staff and resources that are independent of the company and would make a decision on a company-by-company basis. We know, for example, with the wage subsidies, that the calculator is very imprecise, and it often results in unjust enrichment to executives and shareholders. We know that there's been an audit done of the lack of internal controls over the awarding of money to hundreds and hundreds of companies, and this is a significant expenditure into the billions of dollars. So you're right, John, that it is nuanced, but that would be the job of an independent entity or person to make those determinations, so that it provides a backstop for the government. Because clearly, the government is trying, and it's making the argument that we have to get the money out the door, but there should be greater controls on a company-by-company basis, because the evidence is that the controls aren't there and it's being abused.
So the pushback always is, then you're going to hinder our ability to get the best-in-class talent if we can't craft compensation the way the market is dictating we should.
Yeah, Amber, I recall Ken Feinberg lectured at the time to corporate governance experts, and he calls this a myth, and he said, it's overplayed. And anytime an executive plays this card that I'm going to go somewhere else, the evidence is, according to Mr. Feinberg, it doesn't happen. So oftentimes that leverage is used, to ratchet up pay. And it's more of a myth than anything. And if someone leaves, talent is not irreplaceable. So the well trot out argument that you need to pay people to stay, I'm not sure that bears out. So I'm not necessarily advocating for something radical here. I'm just saying, listen, the boards are dropping the ball and the government is dropping the ball. So maybe a fresh approach might be needed. That's all I'm saying.